Steven Spielberg has finally released my most anticipated movie of 2026, and unfortunately, it did just not live up to the hype. Now, let me be perfectly clear, I did not hate the film. In fact, there are aspects of it that I genuinely enjoyed. There are moments where you can absolutely feel Spielberg's talent as a filmmaker. The problem is that when you've spent nearly 50 years redefining blockbuster cinema and practically inventing the modern alien movie, expectations are naturally going to be sky high, and that's where my disappointment comes from. I think a huge part of the issue is that I walked into the movie expecting one thing and getting something completely different. Based on the marketing, the trailers, the mysterious teasers, not only just the fact that it's Steven Spielberg returning to the UFO and extraterrestrial genre, I expected something closer to War of the Worlds, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or Super 8. I was expecting a large-scale alien thriller. That's not really what this film is. Instead, what Spielberg has actually made is much more of a conspiracy thriller. It's a race against time mystery about government secrets, cover-ups, hidden agendas, and the question of whether humanity is ready to learn the truth. The closest comparison I could think of is actually the Mel Gibson film Conspiracy Theory. The movie spends much more time investigating rumors, chasing clues, uncovering documents, and debating the implications of extraterrestrial life than it is actually showing extraterrestrial life. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is that the actual stuff with the aliens doesn't really become a major focus until about the final half hour. By that point, you've spent nearly 3 hours following investigations, political discussions, religious debates, and multiple separate storylines. And that leads into my biggest issue with the movie, the narrative structure. The film feels overstuffed. Emily Blunt was marketed as the central character, but she doesn't even really appear until around 20 minutes into the film. Once she arrives, the movie immediately becomes more engaging. Her storyline is compelling, her performance is excellent, and she brings a sense of urgency to the story that was desperately needed. Whenever the film focuses on Emily Blunt and her investigation, I was completely invested. Unfortunately, the movie keeps pulling away from her, and there are simply too many protagonists. Every time the movie builds momentum with their storyline, it cuts away to another character, and then another character, and then another character. Before long, you're juggling 4 or 5 major plot lines that all compete for screen time. Some of the side stories are interesting on paper, but they frequently slow the pacing down. A lot of the movie is devoted to philosophical discussions about religion, faith, God, and humanity's place in the universe. The film repeatedly asks questions like, if intelligent life exists elsewhere, what does that mean for religion? What does it mean for faith? What does it mean for understanding of creation? But the problem is that the movie never really says anything particularly new about them. The conversations feel like discussions I've already heard in documentaries, television specials, podcasts, sci-fi novels, and of course countless episodes of The X-Files. The film presents the questions, but never arrives at any conclusions that feel fresh or surprising. And speaking of X-Files, that's honestly the comparison I kept coming back to throughout the movie. Disclosure Day often feels less like this major Spielberg event blockbuster and more just like a very expensive, very long episode of X-Files. And when talking about Steven Spielberg, I expect something that pushes the genre forward. I expect something that makes me think, I've never seen this before. Instead, I kept finding myself thinking, I've seen versions of this before. And then we get to the aliens themselves, which were honestly the biggest disappointment for me. For a filmmaker who gave us the wonder of E.T., the mystery of Close Encounters, and the terrifying tripods of War of the Worlds, the alien designs are just super generic. They're the stereotypical extraterrestrials you've seen a billion times before. The big heads, the large black eyes, the thin bodies. It's the safest design they could have come up with. There's nothing memorable or unique about them. And maybe that was intentional, maybe Spielberg wanted to lean into classic UFO mythology, but it just felt unimaginative. The CGI is also very clunky, which is disappointing for a Spielberg film, because this is the director who revolutionized practical effects with Jaws. This is the filmmaker who brought E.T. to life. This is the guy who helped create Jurassic Park, a movie whose practical effects still look better than some modern blockbusters more than 30 years later, so seeing him rely so heavily on CGI that just looks artificial feels incredibly strange. There are several moments throughout the film where I found wishing Spielberg had embraced practical effects more heavily. Then it might have felt more tangible and believable. It never quite reaches the level of wonder of Spielberg's best work. And that's really, the recurring theme of the review. The movie isn't bad, but by Spielberg standards, it's disappointing. If another director had made the exact same film, I probably think it was a solid, entertaining conspiracy thriller, but Spielberg's not just another director. He's Steven Spielberg. The expectations are different. When Spielberg tackles aliens, I expect something groundbreaking. When he tackles mystery, I expect something unforgettable. When he does sci-fi, I expect something that changes the conversation. And Disclosure Day doesn't really do any of those things. It's entertaining, it's occasionally thrilling, Emily Blunt gives a strong performance, the mystery is engaging enough to keep you watching, and there are some moments where Spielberg's mastery shines through, but by Spielberg standards, it just feels very, very safe. It never takes any risks. It never discovers a new angle on extraterrestrial life. It never really says anything particularly profound, and it never reaches the emotional or cinematic highs of Spielberg's greatest films. Ultimately, I think your enjoyment of it will depend entirely on what you're expecting when you go in. If you go in expecting something like War of the Worlds or Close Encounters or some other alien-focused spectacle, you're probably going to leave disappointed like I did. But if you know now from this review that you're going in, you're getting conspiracy thriller first, with elements of sci-fi sprinkled in, you're probably going to have a much better experience. I still say it's a worthwhile watch. Like I said, I was entertained and I don't regret seeing it, but it's not a movie I can imagine people are talking about 10 or 20 years from now when they talk about Spielberg's true classics. So for me, it gets a B-, an 8 out of 10, and a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's worth seeing. Just know the type of film that it is not what it is advertised as.